Hello, good morning, Aaron and Dr. Jasmine Day.
Good morning.
Hi.
Hello, it's a pleasure to have you both here. Now, we're having this particular chat following the news of the possibility of a sale of Egyptian antiquities by the American Institute of Archaeology. And there are obviously issues surrounding this which have been touched on recently, for example with the sale of Sekhem Ka here in Britain and Northampton Council. And I know that Jasmine, Dr. Day there, has been writing quite a lot on this topic, and also that Aaron feels very strongly about this possibility. So can we just start with you, Jasmine, and hear a little bit about the background to this?
Yes, around the turn of last century, Flinders Petrie, the father of Egyptology, excavated something which has come to be known as the Treasure of Harageh, a group of jewellery pieces, inlaid jewellery pieces, and beautiful alabaster stone pieces, which were sold legally, excavated for the St. Louis branch of the American Institute of Archaeology. And now, all this time later, to raise funds, the St. Louis branch wants to sell those and has put them up in an auction house online. However, this has caused a lot of controversy for various reasons, and also the head AIA branch was not notified of the sale before it went ahead. So we await the outcome of the sale, and also whether the sale will even be allowed to go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Now, clearly, this, to a certain extent, I suppose, as an outside observer, as an academic archaeologist, that you're taking an interest on one level. But I mean, how does this, as an American archaeologist, how does this concern you, Aaron?
It concerns me because I think it concerns me how it was handled altogether. It seems to me it was kind of underhanded, kind of under the table, very quiet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if they needed funds, at least me, I've tried to do some research. We don't even know what these funds are apparently for.
Mm-hmm.
And even the auction house, I believe, is based out of the UK instead of here in the US. So I don't understand why it's going out that way. It just looks like they're trying to keep it as low key as possible, and that bothers me quite a bit. And it's also a big problem to me because here in the US, there's enough problems with TV shows and media trying to glorify making money off of cultural heritage artifacts and stuff like that. And now we have a official archaeological society, or branch of it anyway, doing exactly what we're trying to stop from being glorified and made here popular in the United States.
Okay. So in that sense, I suppose the tension between the objects are as intrinsically valuable and them as culturally valuable is being really thrown into sharp focus with this, especially, as you say, in the context of things like American Digger and similar shows, which are all about finding an object and then immediately selling it. Now, what I suppose should be the boundaries? I mean, it sounds to me like you think that the boundary has been crossed here, Aaron. But what do you think, Jasmine?
Well, I think the real issue here, in the case of the Harageh Treasure, is not actually a legal boundary. The sale is actually legal because the objects were acquired legally under Egyptian law at the time, which has changed over time. Now you can't take anything out of Egypt, but that was once permitted by the Egyptian government. They even gave away a portion of their fines, the fines made by foreign archaeologists. So there's no question of the legality of the sale. Any objects taken out of Egypt prior to the 1970 UNESCO Portable Antiquities legislation, any objects taken out of Egypt prior to 1970 have become, if only retrospectively, legalised. So there's no question of the legality of the Harageh sale, but the issue, I think, is one of ethics. Arguably, selling these things which were presented to this organisation for the benefit of the public and education and history, and just selling them, converting them back into commodities, is not in the spirit in which Petrie presented them to the group.
Okay. And do you agree, Aaron? Do you think that ethics should be the primary concern in this instance?
I would definitely agree with the ethics part. I mean, especially, like I said earlier, how does that look to at least the Americans, the American people over here? as well as the world. I mean, the American people over here who are archaeology, I guess, is not as, I wouldn't say critical, but I mean, it's a very select group. A lot of the regular, normal day people don't have the passion for archaeology as much as other countries do, because I guess maybe because we're a young country. I'm not sure, but for it looks hypocritical to me, I guess, to a certain extent, the ethical behind it, because here we are trying to preserve our cultural heritage, and then here we have this society working under the AIA that is now selling that cultural heritage to possibly a private collector, and now future generations couldn't even study it, and no one can appreciate what's there, what they have. It's going to maybe end up just on a mantle somewhere or hidden in a box. It's just, it really does unnerve me a little bit.
Okay. Well, I suppose part of the question here is whose responsibility is it to police these things? I mean, there is, as Jasmine was saying, a legitimate market for these artifacts. But if we're trying to, I suppose the phrase would be, win hearts and minds in terms of the value of artifacts and physical history, where should it start? Is it actually too late by the time you get to the realm of archaeologists who have usually a very specific interest in a specifically small world? Is it too late then actually to be kicking up a stink? Should this start, I don't know, even in primary schools? What do you think, Jasmine?
Well, I think going back to what Aaron was saying a moment ago, although a sale such as the one in this particular case, the Harageh case, is legal, it gives the wrong impression to the public, some of whom are not very clear about what's legal and illegal, ethical or unethical in archaeology. So although we in academia can say this is legal, that's not legal, there's the difference. That's not a distinction that the public can easily make. Most people don't spend a lot of their time thinking about this stuff like we do. It's just not their thing. So their exposure to it may be through American Diggers or something like that, and they won't be the ones who say American Diggers is illegal, Harageh is legal. They're the ones who'll draw the connection, and Aaron suggested they'll say, well, if archaeologists or academics are selling this stuff, then why can't the rest of us? It's not fair that we're not allowed to sell it. Who do they think they are? They'll look at it in a completely different way, and it's no good us saying they've got it wrong. They're looking at it ethically, and the public, in my research that I've done looking at mummies and museums, the public often look at things not in terms of the legalities but ethics.
Well, I suppose that's my point. Where do we start to talk about the ethics of this stuff with people?
And I think that's something that archaeologists often fail to take into consideration. They are divorced from popular culture. The best a lot of them can do is dismiss it or say it's wrong or illegal, and they're not actually engaging with it. They're not educating the public about illegal versus legal, and they're not engaging with the ethics and even accepting that in some cases their own ethics may be quite dodgy.
Okay. Right. Well, that word "stodgy" I think is a very, very appropriate word. I think certainly in some of the academic circles that I've been privy to, there is this assumption that academic authority is the ultimate authority, and yet when it comes to, for example, the sale of something from a public collection for a private collection, it's not really the academia that ultimately sways it. I mean, for example, in the case of Sekhem Ka, that certainly wasn't the case, and to be honest, even public opinion scarcely made a dent. This was a political thing. Ultimately, eventually, it came down to a local government deciding we want to sell this because we want to do an expansion on the museum. We want to also expand the art gallery. Should we be taking issues like this and cases such as the potential sale of a collection from the AIA to government? And in which case, how does one go about doing that? Obviously, yes, there is as we've touched on, the argument and the need to talk to the general public about the ethics, but ultimately the decision makers are going to be a very small bunch of people. How can we possibly make an effect on that?
I know at least here, I agree with Dr. Day as far as archaeologists kind of failing to do that outreach. It's the same way here. Like, when we have controversial shows that involve archaeology, anthropology, and there's something wrong with it, archaeologists are very, at least this is my opinion, are very good at kind of arguing and showing their unfavor within their circles.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as getting the media's attention, the outreach, I mean, if they would actually just outreach to the news agencies, the national news agencies, and tell them some of the stuff that's going on, that would, I would think, would put a big boost in the archaeologists' favor and the material culture that might be in danger.
Mm-hmm.
But that's never really done. They're very, I just think I see a lot of archaeologists, and not all of them, but there can be a lot of them that are very isolated. They don't do public that well. So I think the media would be a big help, but also as far as getting the government involved or trying to get them to help with the helping with maybe stopping it or making sure at least approaching it or viewing it in the future, some sort of legislation. Yeah, you can reach out to them, but I think I know with Second Ka, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Mark, but I'm not even sure if the Egyptian government's aware of it's being this stuff being sold right now. I know they had a problem when Second Ka was being sold. They were actually very adamant against that. Now, having another government speaking out against it, I'm sure would help with dealing with your government. But I think in the end, the Egyptian government as well as national media attention would definitely help sway, especially here in the United States. This year would be, there's elections. So they're going to be sitting there. If it becomes national enough attention, they'll start watching it very closely.
Okay. Just very briefly, just to comment on that. I mean, in the case of Second Ka, certainly, yes, the Egyptian government was aware of it. We had Zahi Hawass on the morning of the sale going on a full-on rant about the sale on BBC Radio 2. No, BBC Radio 4. But in the situation, as you say, I mean, yes, this is in some ways possibly a fortuitous timing because of upcoming elections in the US for possibly highlighting this issue. But should we have to rely on those moments to make these sorts of points? I mean, what do you think, Jasmine? Is there a more effective way to I suppose in a medium and long term sort of actually have a lobbying relationship with government about these heritage national and international issues?
Yes, there does need to be a lot more proactivity on the part of academics, Egyptologists, archaeologists, whether we're talking Egyptology or any other kind of archaeology. As Aaron was saying, archaeologists have a bad history of a relationship with the media. They have not done their own PR terribly well, to the extent that the media has taken over the representation of archaeology and turned it into Stargate and Indiana Jones and American Diggers. So that's one point against archaeologists. But I think a second issue here, beyond how archaeologists represent themselves and their interest to the public and how they even lobby the government, is the fact that all too often, particularly I find in Britain and the US, where there's an awful lot of archaeology in the ground and still coming up, the government doesn't have, in my impression, full control in every instance of what is dug up or what happens to things after they go into museums. Here in Western Australia, if you dig up something and it's archaeological or historic, it's state property, and if you hang on to it, you're in trouble. Now, that's not always the case in the UK. If it's on your land, you can keep it, or maybe you get some money for handing it over to the government. The government won't give you money here. It's the property of the state. So this concept that finders keepers, that it belongs to whoever dug it up, or it belongs to the local council, like an Egyptian statue. Why does a local council in Britain that knows jack about archaeology and cares less have anything to do with the control of such a precious ancient Egyptian statue? So I think that, yes, to answer your question, we need to use highlight moments like Sekemka or this current Harageh sale to draw this attention to public attention. And I think archaeologists need to do better PR and lobby the government. And I also think that rules and laws need to change to give governments more control over and more interest in what is dug up in their countries, instead of letting it fall into the wrong hands so often as it does.
Okay. Well, I'll just sort of address some of those comments that you made there, just for the sake of people who are watching. In the UK, it's not literally finders keepers. There are structures in place, but there's also one of those things where, because archaeology is so ubiquitous, because it's all over the place, it is hard to police. So an awful lot of finds, say prior to the portable antiquities scheme, will have made their way into private collections and foreign markets and so on. And actually, over the course of, I think, the last they recently did a report that showed over a substantial amount of time, essentially since the PAS started, they've saved many thousands of artifacts, and that we now have records in terms of what they are, where they were found, and the context isn't lost, and so on. In the case of Second Carl belonging to the council, to a certain extent he didn't. It was sort of like a long-term loan from an aristocrat, and that, I suppose, that's a level of interaction which, to a certain extent, I suppose, thankfully, both the US and Australia don't have to deal with. But just out of interest, in the case of Australia, when something is found in the ground, is that everything is state property, or is that down to a certain depth? My understanding has been that it's down to a couple of meters.
I'm not actually sure whether it has anything to do with depth or quite what it is. I was thinking specifically of, say, findings of Australian Aboriginal artefacts. You can't just interfere with those sites. If you find a site, you're supposed to report it, not interfere with it, or take the antiquities. Also, in particular, Dutch shipwreck material, which never used to be protected until, I think the late 1970s or something. Sometime in the 1970s there was a big change. And prior to that, people were just going around and picking up cutlasses and human skulls and bottles and you name it, and finally, and stealing from the shipwrecks. And finally, the government said, "This is ours," and they enacted legislation. It was pushed through by a group of marine archaeologists at the Western Australian Museum. They pushed the government, they lobbied the government successfully, and had this legislation brought through with a big result in protection for these sites, collection of the materials from them, including a period when they said, look, if you've got something, I think this was only a few years ago, if you've got something from these wrecks that you found on the land, hand it in and we won't prosecute. You've got a certain length of time to do that. People were bringing in all sorts of stuff, cutlasses and things like that. So the interest that was shown by the public was tapped into by the archaeologists lobbying the government. You know, everybody was on side, and slowly the people who had been robbing these ships were sort of turned from Indiana Jones into the bad guys and prosecuted.
Okay. Well, I suspect that this is a conversation that we should return to at some point. I feel that we are coming to an end here, but I think it would be really fruitful to have a bit of a think about the relationship between, I suppose, one's current home culture and archaeology. For example, in the US, there is still the American dream. If you find it, and if you can make it happen, then good on you, kind of thing. In Britain, there is still a sense of, I think, broadly speaking, a certain amount of respect for history. So most people seem to want to preserve history in some way, but there's also many people who want to make money from it. And in Australia, there's the complication of, for example, the Aboriginal population, these Dutch shipwrecks, and, for example, I don't know, say the sale of bottles, Victorian era bottles and this kind of thing. It's perhaps actually what we've been talking about here is broad stroke, and that's not a bad thing, but maybe what we need to think about next is actually how is facing up to the possibility that there is no one cure all. Maybe there's not one pill that will solve this for all these different cultures, because we may all broadly speak the same language, but we don't necessarily all think the same way when it comes to our past. I find that quite a fascinating possibility. So I don't know, would you guys be up for another chat in the near future?
Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah, grand. Yes. Okay, cool. Well, hopefully this has been an interesting discussion. This is really what this series is all about. It's about literally talking about the topics, and it's unscripted, and hopefully it comes across well. So if you guys have any comments or thoughts, please do comment below. We will read them, and in time for the next, I suppose, part of this discussion, because I think this does warrant at least a second video, we'll take those comments on board, and we'll weave them into what we're talking about. So as ever, thank you guys very much for your time. I know it's very early for you, Aaron, and it's sort of a reasonable time in the evening for you, Jasmine. Here, well, as ever, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye bye.